Self-determination is happening in many ways. This is Central Australia Aboriginal Media, the first radio network to be run by and for Aborigines in their own languages.
At the beginning, they couldn't believe that it was happening. I'd seen people cry when we first showed them how to find our radio, our station on the dial. I spent the first few weeks we were on air just going around the fringe camps, showing people if they got a radio, where they found it on the dial, and the people were just so overwhelmed.
But to hear their own language
hear their own language on the radio.
Well, good afternoon, time is 7 minutes past 1.
In 1986, a new television satellite will beam all the great milestones of Western civilization to the outback. Dallas, This Is Your Life, Sale of the Century. From the coming of the first settlers and their sheep to the miners and their bulldozers, the Aborigines have lost out. With the coming of this new satellite, will a venture such as this be smothered and they lose out again?
He didn't line it up properly.
The same determination that is keeping alive ancient languages has produced from virtually nothing in 1970 Aboriginal councils that are democratically based and legal and medical services that are informal, accessible and truly part of the Aboriginal community.
The long-term goal is self-determination, and the obstacle is what we call the Aboriginal industry. There are so many white people in Aboriginal affairs doing things that we can do, running our communities when our communities can run them themselves, and so that it seems almost impossible at the moment to do anything about that. But if you take a long-term view, we've come a long way in terms of achieving self-determination on the ground in running our own communities and organisations, and in convincing Aboriginal people that they can do it, that one doesn't have to be reliant on the long socks.
It's like Big Brother watching, you know. Look, you do the right thing. If you don't, I'll cliff you under the ears, you know. So our big white brothers prefer that we stick under their rules.
Their rules?
Their rules.
Do you think there'll ever come a time where you'll have your own rules?
Well, I don't care what rule they get. I've got my rule in my sacred site, which I keep, and I'm proud of it.
The Walpiri people of the Northern Territory have transformed this former mission at Bamyili into their own community, with a bus, a clinic, and a school where the first black teachers are qualifying.
I'm listening to the radio.
Yeah, I'm listening to the radio, yeah. And where will go then? Where will reckon I'm going?
I'm going to look like chicken.
Well, he allowed his picture, yeah, what him doing? Yeah, me get up from bed, what about here now? What about this picture here?
Buckingham Palace, scenes of Christmas snow. Education here is still white-controlled and has yet to look to the other side of the frontier, while the blacks are still asked to make all the compromises. At least they're no longer being taught that Captain Cook found them.
Do that again. Point to the word Christmas.
Far west of here are other resurgent communities where there are no compromises. These are known as outstations, where Aborigines run their own cattle and are self-supporting. There's little welfare, no TV and no alcohol. Several of them have shortwave radio and their own airstrips. 20 years ago, such a choice would have been unthinkable. At Yipperinya School near Alice Springs, the children of people who were once forced off their land by squatter farmers are taught their origins. such as the gathering of traditional food known as bush tucker, kangaroo, witchetty grub, wild onions. And this is how others regard the land. For the Aborigines, the history of mining in Australia is the story of brutal eviction without compensation. For example, at Mapoon in Queensland, the Aborigines refused to leave when the Queensland government awarded a lease to the giant Comalco company for bauxite mining. So armed police landed after dark, arrested the entire community, and burnt their homes, their church, their school and shops. That was 1963. There's no film record. Such atrocities were not news then. But by 1980, the Aborigines were waiting and organised. So much so that the police had to escort a drilling rig 1,500 miles to a sacred site at Nunkamba in Western Australia.
Stay off the road, you're being warned. Stay off.
What was significant about this was the white popular support for the Aborigines, which raises a universal question. Is it possible for the haves to restore to the have-nots an honoured place in their nation's history? What is tantalising about these events in Australia is that the answer to that question is not predetermined, not yet, and that there still seems a possibility for reconciliation between people of the first and third worlds sharing one country. In some respects, Australia denies itself sovereignty, for it's the most foreign-owned of any developed country. So what does land rights really mean? Who really owns Australia? This is freehold land owned by most ordinary Australians. That is the 90% who live in suburban towns and cities. And this is land leased by the pastoralists, many of them large foreign companies, and farmers whose forebears squatted on land in the 19th century. These are national parks where the wildlife can only be shot with a camera. And this is vacant Crown land, nothing to do with the royal family. It's land owned by the state and federal governments. And this is the land that the Aborigines have won back as a result of limited legislation in the 1970s. Most of it is barren desert, the kind of land whites don't want. Unless, of course, there's something rich underneath it.